Okay, so welcome everyone with the continuation of our Bhagavad Gita sessions. Originally, we started, I think, 1.5 years ago, approximately. And the frequency was about once every 2 weeks. And the idea was that we were going to start from the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita and then work towards the end. It's a relatively small book. You could say it's the Bible of yoga. Everything yoga can be traced back more or less to the Bhagavad Gita, more so even than the Yoga Sutras. So if you study the Bhagavad Gita and know it well, then you have the whole treasure trove of Indian philosophy. And I would say probably much of what you can find in esoteric bookshops. Many wisdom books, somehow or other, are linked towards conceptions of the wisdom teachings from the Bhagavad Gita. So I think I can say that it's probably the book that changed the lives of people in the most profound way than any other spiritual book, specifically given its size, because it's only 700 Sanskrit verses. And usually they are accompanied by commentary and interpretations, because if you only read the verses in and by themselves, it can be a bit challenging and confusing without knowing the context of the whole yoga tradition. But it's a beautiful book, and we started from the beginning, and the idea was that we would go through the end, but we would structure it in such a way that people could join and participate at any given moment, which is possible because the wisdom teachings in the different chapters are very applicable to everyday situations. You don't need to know the beginning in order to make sense of what comes after, although it can be quite helpful if you start from the beginning and go to the end. But at the moment, from that original group, today there's only Eric in the group present. We have some more who could not make it today. So I think what we want to do, because quite a lot of new people are joining now, is probably to come to a new setup of understanding how we want to study the Bhagavad Gita. And maybe at the end of what we are doing today, we can have a little bit of input of everyone involved, because I would also like to very much cater to everyone's needs and desires. So maybe you can get a little bit of an idea from the session that we will do today, and then we can have a little bit of an exchange of what would people feel inclined to, what would work for them. And I think what is important for me, I think, is how to make the translation of the wisdom teachings from the Gita, as we have them, in an application into everyday life. I think most of you are somehow rather acquainted with yoga, the path of yoga, mostly known by asana yoga and some meditation for most people. But the whole idea about yoga, and I think why it got such a strong foothold in Western countries, is because it really has the power to transform people's everyday lives. Even through an asana practice, you get more grounded, you get more connected to something essential, to essence inside yourself, to silence. So I think one of the reasons for yoga to be so popular, that people experience that direct link to how is this helping me in my everyday life to come closer to myself and closer to truth. And that is the aim of studying sacred scriptures, actually. So how can we distill the wisdom from the ancient yogis, the ancient sages, and how is it applicable to everyday life? I think that should be the aim and focus. And if I speak for myself, that is what this book has done for me in my life. I find it to be very applicable in navigating myself and my journey in this, I would say, particular incarnation towards essence, towards truth. And yeah, so this is how I want to frame how we want to use the Bhagavad Gita and how to study it. So if you look at the yoga path in particular, there you can view it as a toolbox with tools that are handed down to us, which we can integrate and apply in different aspects of our lives. And that goes from basically how we work, how we deal with each other. It deals with communication. It deals with our relation to food. It deals with sexuality. It deals with our relation with our mind, about meditation. It's a toolbox of many different aspects that we can use. And eventually from those toolboxes, you can create what is called a sadhana, meaning type of a daily practice, which you can use to enhance your life and to come more in connection with union, which is actually basically the meaning of the word yoga, means to unite. So coming to deeper union. One of those tools in the yoga toolbox, so to speak, is called svadhyaya. That means self-inquiry, inquiry into the nature of our own being, into the nature of consciousness, and particularly that is done with the help of scripture, which you can view in a sense as a distilled essence that the ancient yogis have put down in writing. Now, I think it's important to know that did not used to be the case in the old days. There, it was said that people had very good memories, and they would gather around in you could call them satsangs, which means a circle of truth, circles of self-inquiry, and there would be an exchange, usually with a teacher who was very experienced on the path of yoga, and there would be a live exchange and a live dialogue, and scripture was not really necessary. So it is said that at a certain point in time, the memory capabilities of the human beings got worse, and eventually that's why putting down the sacred knowledge into scripture has taken place for us now to use and to deliberate on. But it really comes to life always in a live exchange with a group of people like us now who have some desire and inquiry to dive into the treasure trove of the ancient yoga wisdom. So, like I said, the Gita, it is only 700 verses, Sanskrit verses. Those verses are usually in a meter, and that has many advantages. One of the advantages is that if you like, you can easily learn some of the verses by heart. I guess a lot of you know different songs by heart. And the reason why it's quite easy to learn a song is because it has a different meter and a different rhyme. You remember that rhyme, and then you can call upon your memory to repeat the song. Whereas it's much more difficult to repeat a page of prose from a book that you may have read, because there are sentences, there's no real structure into the sentences, there's no rhyme. So there's a power in these Sanskrit verses, they're called shlokas, and if you want, you can learn them, and then they can function as a kind of a wisdom library that you can draw upon. So in my experience, sometimes in certain situations, I remember a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, like you can remember certain wisdom teachings that you might have heard somewhere, or sometimes you have in homes, you have like a little I call it a placket with like a small wisdom teaching. Those are easy to remember, but all the verses of the Bhagavad Gita can actually function as such. And at a certain point in time, you can create like a reference library of wisdom verses that are really functioning and very helpful in every life situations. It's a very beautiful way that it is. The Sanskrit language has that particular type of energy and power to it. So, because 700 verses, it's not that much. If you would condense it, like this is already a little book that we are using, and that has the Sanskrit and the translation, and it's quite spacious. So if you would only have the verses, you are down to a few pages actually. But the depth of the wisdom teachings contained in them is quite amazing. So yeah, I think if you would have to choose one book which you can go deeper and deeper in and dive into the depths of the soul, it's the Bhagavad Gita is a very good candidate and contestant. So it has been translated into many different languages, and it has many different commentaries. So if you go to a bookshop to look for a Bhagavad Gita, usually the books are a lot bigger, but that's because they all are accompanied by commentary. And the commentary is what is making it alive. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe it's good to do a little round for those who are here, and then you can just unmute your microphone. If I would like to know if everyone is familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, or if there are also participants who are completely fresh and new to the Bhagavad Gita. So Eric, of course, I know he has been.
Eric is a pro. I attended a couple of your sessions, but I feel fairly new to it.
Yeah. Okay.
I've read it well, and I'm also reading.
I think you froze, Laura.
Oh, did I?
You didn't get that.
How about now?
Yeah.
Good?
Yeah.
No? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. No? Good?
Yeah, we hear
Yes?
you.
Okay. I said I've read the Yep. Okay. I've read the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm now reading Path to God. I think it's called by Ram Dass, which is, I guess you would call it a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. But I also feel like you could probably study it for many, many years and still feel like you scratched the surface. So I'm familiar, but wouldn't say anywhere close to advanced. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go.
Yeah, sis.
You can hear me? I have a copy, and I started like twice or 3 times, but never finished.
Okay.
That's why I thought now finally, with help of Arjuna, maybe I'll
Let's do it.
make some more of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Joe?
Joe?
I've never read it.
You never read it, okay. Annika?
Unmute. Hello?
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. So I only wrote the Dutch version, and I did a study group with my dad, but did not really work out because we both had the same questions in the end. So, I don't know. I also don't know. Well, this is really interesting, and I also now have the English version.
Oh yeah, that's Yogananda's one, I guess. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
But that's it.
All right, Anna.
Not familiar. Completely blanco.
Completely blanco. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so last time we ended up at chapter 9, which is a bit like in the middle of the book. but it has quite a few beautiful universal teachings in it. So I think what would be best to do is I give a little bit of a short contextual introduction about the Bhagavad Gita, a little bit about the preceding chapters, and then some wisdom teachings from chapter 9. And let's see how we can link them maybe to to the questions that we are faced with in everyday life. So I wanted to start with a little story that some students once asked one of my teachers, and it points a little bit towards essence. What is actually essential knowledge for us to have, and what is the essence of life in the deepest sense of the term. And at one point in time, they expressed a little bit their concern about the nuclear world war, World War III. They were quite concerned about it, that might take place at one point in time. And I think we all have these type of concerns that seem to threaten our existence, our way of life. I think we are experiencing one right now to a certain extent. But his answer was quite telling. So he said about World War III, the nuclear world war, he said that occasion, if it were to take place, is a dot on a line in a plane in a solid, going towards ad infinitum. He said there will be war after war after war in the world of time and space. And in the end, there will be the universal dissolution, the dissolution of the universe. You know, the sun will burn up and everything will dissolve. And then he asked, are you concerned about that? You know, are you concerned about the universal dissolution? It's going to be quite a bit worse than a nuclear disaster. It will be, the whole universe will be contracted into itself. So, and his point was that it's not of ultimate concern in a world of time and space, as things are always revolving in a cyclical pattern of there is birth, there is maintenance for some time, and then there is death in the end, and that thing is recycled over and over again in time and space. And what the Bhagavad Gita, what spirituality is doing, is it is always pointing towards a reality which is not being disturbed or touched by these external changes in the environment. It is pointing towards something which is eternal, it is undying, it is full of everlasting consciousness. And in the end, there is no solutions in that sense to material issues there, because a material solution will create another problem. So to put it into perspective, you could say that to take a little bit of a spiritual perspective, that hunger in the final analysis is not a problem of the stomach, but a problem of the heart, because you can never quench hunger by eating. It's because the next day you will be hungry again, right? So what is the deepest hunger that we are having? That will, you could say, the soul thirst or something like that. That will satisfy that. So my teacher was putting it into a perspective of we should not be too much concerned about problems that occur naturally due to the nature of time and space and the ingredients which are always present in that. That meaning to say, there's always a start of something, it lasts for a little while, and then it will die. So what we should be concerned about mostly is that which is underlying that, which is unchanging. That is the essence where we should look for, because there will never be a lasting solution of a material thing. You cannot create a solution on the same level where it occurs. So there's no material solution for what is essentially a material problem. That does not mean to say that it should be neglected. But what frequently happens is that the full focus is being diverted of trying to create that final solution that, and as soon as you think you have reached it, then something else will come up. So you may try to develop a vaccine which will eradicate all of the coronaviruses, but probably by the time you've reached that, some other illness will have manifested itself. So it will, those things go on and on. So of ultimate concern is something which is indestructible and ever truthful. And then we dive into the nature of consciousness, basically. And that is what the Bhagavad Gita is concerned with. So one of the reasons why the Gita is so relevant is that it starts exactly at such a point in life where there's a lot of confusion and hard choices need to be made. And there may be a sense of bewilderment. What is the right thing to do here? So the Bhagavad Gita actually starts at the onset of a big war that Arjuna, my namesake, is supposed to fight, but he has to fight against his own relatives, which we can understand causes quite a moral dilemma for him. How can you, and it's quite clear that war will result in a lot of casualties. A lot of people will die. Quite a bit of havoc will be created by that war. And thus Arjuna is very much confused and in doubt whether he should engage in that war. Yet it seems inevitable. So in that sense, it functions really as a type of framework for many situations in our own life, that we are confronted with a difficult situation, with a problem that we may want to avoid, which is exactly what Arjuna's intention is on trying to sneak out of his predicament, engaging in the war. And that is exactly what he tells Krishna. He says, like, I only see trouble having to engage in this fight. I don't think I want to engage in it. So he would like actually to withdraw and cast aside his responsibility also. And then Krishna is starting his teachings to Arjuna. And he's taking it also like the answer my teacher was giving. He's taking it directly on a spiritual level to go towards an ultimate solution, but at the same time instructing Arjuna not to abandon and forsake his relative duties. And this is why the Gita is so relevant and applicable to situations in our relative in our lives where we experience these problems, because it is a call towards rightful action, but without getting entangled into either the results of those actions or the relativities. So it's encouraging us to take a moral stance and to act responsibly, while at the same time going and dive deeper within and act from a place which is ever present and ever conscious and ever tranquil, ever peaceful, and ever loving. So that is what the Gita is advocating. But it starts like the scene is a battlefield or a war. So the metaphor that is being given, that Arjuna represents the soul, like we all are souls, we are all individual units of consciousness. And we find ourselves, I think we can all identify with that, we find ourselves in a certain type of predicament. We are born into a body, into a particular type of situation in the world, where we are faced with, you could say, the challenges of life. What is the best path? Where are we going to? What is the best path to follow? What is in essence the deepest meaning of life? Where do we want to move towards? And those are all questions that the Gita is giving a perspective on. And as such, it is inviting us to see how we resonate with that. And this is also what I think is very important within the whole yoga tradition. It is not as such you have to do this or else manual. There are wisdom teachings where we are invited to ponder upon and to reflect on and see if we feel there's some truth in there, how we can apply it to our own lives, and if that is genuinely resulting in a deeper sense of connection, a deeper state of peace, and eventually, what is the goal of all yoga practice is to come to a state of self-realization in which our own inner divinity is realized and lived in a perpetual state of consciousness. So there is a path and a trajectory, and we are invited by the Bhagavad Gita to follow some of its teachings and then see if this is really helping us towards reaching our goal of a more fulfilled and connected life. So that is where the Gita is starting and leading us to. Is that a good summary so far, Noel?
Yeah. I think so.
By lack of direct response, I'm just asking Noel.
But I would like to include them too.
Maybe this is a good time for you to give some feedback if I give a framework that is resonating, or if you already have some question at this point in time.
Are there any questions? Yeah, Joe has a question.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah. You can unmute yourself.
You have to unmute.
I found it, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have no previous experience with the Bhagavad Gita, but from my perspective, it seems like from a psychological perspective, so let's say in our lives we confront divorce or the death of a family member or whatever shock to the system or to the spirit or the self, would that be something similar to, say, Arjun sort of fighting with his relatives or whatever, he's confused? So in the psychological sense, would that be similar to this big shocks that we might encounter with life? And what comes after that would be a call to a deeper understanding of life. So actually going deeper from these bad experiences and learning something from them.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would say that is directly applicable towards that. And but there's many different layers in which the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita can be applied. So you were mentioning the psychological aspect, the psychological thing of we are may have conflicts with different people around us. and how can we resolve that and come to greater harmony with that. I think what the Bhagavad Gita is adding to it, and why it is such a useful book, is that it is, first of all, providing a very clear map of consciousness, and that enables us to ponder upon our placement on the map. So I would say that the Bhagavad Gita provides a map of consciousness and suggests the grand goal of life, which in a yoga context is always a union with the divine, yoga, self-realization, and how we can use all of those different aspects to reach that goal. And that has a psychological level, that has a physical, a body level, that has a spiritual level. So teachings from the Gita and from the yoga tradition as such function as a very beautiful navigation pattern, where it helps a lot with our placement in it, and that we can also see, hey, these type of behaviors, these type of patterns find their origin in certain type of natural patterns which are there, because it's very difficult to overcome a pattern or a habit pattern if you are unaware what perpetuates it and what is the origin of it. So that's also why the Bhagavad Gita is so helpful in, first of all, providing a grand picture of reality so that we can navigate towards that goal. But it definitely has that psychological application.
Yeah. One thing that has intrigued me recently that I read was saying that, and you touched on this a little bit, which was about, Arjuna wants to take the sort of, I guess, lack of a better phrase, the easy way out, and sort of not take a stance, right? And something I was reading lately made that point where it is a conscious choice that we have to make. You choose one or the other. And it was saying around the symbolic nature of, we're either choosing to go towards that pure consciousness, or we're sort of choosing that more fallacy of mind and body and this other identification. And there is a choice that we make, but it's you can't necessarily just not make a choice at all. And I thought that was really interesting, and curious to your thoughts on that.
The last part I missed because there was a sound.
Yeah, last part was that that we are making a choice by either sort of choosing one or the other, and curious as to your thoughts on that, and whether you see that sort of direct interpretation of what it's saying.
Yeah, do you also mean to say that we cannot but make a choice as well?
Yeah, we're forced, or we are making a choice. Just the reality is, like, we're either going towards pure consciousness and we're sort of detaching from that identification that we've habitually, been sort of brought up to have within society and what have you, that you're either choosing that as your identification or you're detaching from that, and you can't sit in the middle.
No, exactly. There's also one verse in the Gita where Krishna is saying it's impossible to be without action in the world, even if we pretend to be completely aloof and neutral and motionless, it is not the case. You already made the choice for that apparent state of being, which also has a lot of interconnections and a lot of consequences. So indeed, we cannot but make a choice. So it's good to make an informed one, and one that is connected to a conscious choice that leads to more connection, instead of more separation. Yeah. Yeah, Annika.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to explain as clear as possible, because my main question about the study is that when if I understand it well, when Krishna starts to explain itself as Brahman, or like the supreme source of what it actually is, he explains that he is everything, or that it's everything. So neither good or neither bad.
Yeah.
It's presenting it's all actually divine, because he is actually it, because he's the one.
Yes.
So in that case, I am just he points out to Arjuna, like it's good to fight because you are a warrior, and these are your like gedragscodes, or how do you call it in English? Your conduct behavior, or this is who you are. So in that sense, you have to do your battle. But on the other hand, if Brahman is all that we define as good and all that we define as bad, why is the conduct then taken even seriously by Krishna itself?
Yeah. That's a very good and important question, because it touches upon the point, is there such a thing as good and evil, or good or bad? Because if everything is contained within the absolute, if everything is coming from the absolute, why would we make a distinction between it?
Yeah, and if I can add a little bit more, because also, like, because in the beginning you said that you in the lecture, like that we do not want to pay attention on all the things that are changing, that are to this Maya world that we have, but we want to connect to the infinite part.
Yes.
But why is Krishna then guiding you through this attached through this like immortal battlefield?
Yeah.
Saying that is the right path.
Yeah. We can already, this is already material for a couple of Gita wisdom gatherings, because there's many very deep and intricate points attached to that, which are difficult to directly answer without a little bit of background, which is coming there before.
Yeah.
Without painting the entire picture that is painted in the Bhagavad Gita and explained by Krishna. But to give a little bit of a short indication towards towards an answer that is being provided by the Gita and the yoga tradition, is that from an absolute point of view, everything is contained in that. So good and bad in the world of time and space in which we live, they are relative necessarily. What is good for one is usually bad for someone else, right? So at the same time, we cannot help but to navigate within the relative principles of good and bad. Because if you equate them and you say, well, and you go to the extreme, then you end up in a type of nihilism, and it doesn't really matter what you do anymore, because good and bad is similar anyway, and that doesn't work. So within a relative framework that we are being placed in, and that is set in a world in a world of Maya, in a world of illusion, where there is time and space and death and destruction, there is good and bad, in the sense that certain actions are perpetuating the karmic cycle. They're creating more karma and thus more relative suffering. And there are certain actions that we do that get us out of the chain of cause and effect, and thereby that is relinquishing the karma, by which the influence that the illusion has on us becomes lighter and lighter, and eventually it can be cast off eternally. Then we are not under that spell anymore. But at the same time, from the perspective of the absolute, there is no good and evil in the eternal sense of the term. Because, and there you have to make the distinction between the consciousness and the act that consciousness is performing under the influence of illusion, right? Yeah. So then you come to the point of you should never ever condemn the doer of something, but what you can condemn or have a moral opinion on is on what is being done, right? And what is being done is under the influence of the forces of material nature, Maya, that are at our disposal, but they have a function as well, namely to say they choose our freedom of choice. We have a freedom of choice either to go towards connection, right, and sharing and love and unity, or we have a choice, and I think every one of us can relate to that experience, right? And by our actions, we can have the choice towards what is the opposite of connection? Disconnection. Disconnection of cut-offness, of more egotistic type of behavior, isolation, and eventually the psychological is usually accompanied by a type of loneliness and depression. So those are consequences of actions that we do. And then the consciousness, our pure consciousness, who we are in our essence, is not being altered by that. And in that sense, it has no bearing on the soul in an ultimate sense. And this is why you have to be very careful in getting into the dualistic condemnation of that is good and that is bad. But we should be concerned about the nature of our actions, because some of them lead to more isolation and disconnectedness, and some of them are leading to connectedness. And that can be in the framework of sometimes having, and that is the case of the Bhagavad Gita, because it's not always fairy dust and roses in actions that we have to perform. So Krishna is instructing Arjuna, you have to engage in this battle, and there will be a lot of bloodshed will be there. But in the case of the Bhagavad Gita, it's very clear that the other party is quote unquote evil, or they are presenting the forces of egotism, of hatred, of disconnectedness, and they have to be confronted with actions that counteract that. And that in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, that is not always turning the other cheek. The Gita is taking it to a different level, that turning the other cheek is what your internal motivation should always be. And it automatically turns more into that way if you are not taking things personal, but if you see, no, I'm counteracting a tendency towards disconnectedness that is also living within myself. And I'm opposing that towards the betterment of the other and myself at the same time. So, but it's very important to always look at these dualistic forces that are present, because I think we all experience that before you know it, you're into the mindset of judging something as good and something else as bad, whereas intuitively, and that is also what the teachings of the Gita is, that eventually the eternal truth of the eternal nature is that it is encompassing and it is embracing everything. And it's even embracing the Mayic world in which we are living. But we can either choose to be involved in that and suffer from it, or we can choose to not be involved in that internally and take the right action. That is the dynamics that we are dealing with here. Does that put that into a context that makes sense a little bit?
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a continuous thing. Like you already said, it's really big. But thank you for...
No, it's extremely big. I would almost say it's touching upon the core theme of one of the major themes that the Bhagavad Gita is expounding, that we are meeting again and again. But it is a call towards what is rightful action in each and every moment. So for that you need viveka, you need a distinction, because otherwise you end up in a type of nihilism that, well, you know, I had a discussion once with a dear friend of mine. He said, well, good and bad do not exist. I said, yes. I said, from an absolute perspective, I can understand that. But almost all the actions that we are doing in our daily lives are precipitated onto a moral understanding that we all have and feel about what is good and what is bad. You know, what is the right action and what is a wrong action. And as long as you keep it towards the action in and of itself, and always see the consciousness, the pure consciousness that is behind an apparent wrong action, I think that then we are on the good track. But it is not very easy. You very easily slip into a condemnation of the doer instead of what is being done. And a lot of the problems that we are experiencing in the world, that they're all coming from that particular issue. And if you can never break the karmic cycle, and it can be in a grand way, but it functions also in very little ways in all of the relationships we have in our life. If you're not able to break that karmic pattern, that someone else did wrong and now there has to be some type of subtle retaliation to make things even, that is what the nature of karma actually. That is always, it has no end to it. So you can only cut through that cycle by recognizing that and taking proper rightful action with, and that's another big theme of the Bhagavad Gita, with internal detachment from the outcome. That is also another major theme. Joe, you wanted to add something?
Yes, very quickly. So, I mean, I think in the Christian tradition, they would say, for example, hate the sin or hate the akta and love the sinner, for example. So is that the similar thing where you're
yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nice one.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. No, but it's also the core of the teachings of Jesus. They point very much towards that aspect. And then within that, we should always be more concerned about where we are, right, and our particular predicament, and be too much concerned about the drawbacks of others, of the people around us. Yeah. Okay. Good. So the Bhagavad Gita, it has 18 chapters, and each chapter is called a yoga. So each chapter title has yoga connected to it. And the Bhagavad Gita starts with the chapter called Vishada Yoga, and it means the yoga of disappointment, which I think it's quite telling and beautiful that, oh, can disappointment also be a yoga? How can disappointment be a yoga? But everything basically which serves as impetus for inquiry can be a yoga. So the chapter starts with the predicament that Arjuna is finding himself on a battlefield with millions of army, opposing armies, millions of people, and he feels that that war is inevitable. He has to fight his relatives. So maybe it's difficult to envision a more dire predicament that you have to, in effect, kill your own family members. That is quite a predicament. So it's logical that Arjuna feels disappointed and dejected, and he doesn't want to engage in this battle. But because in his despair, he is open towards truth. That is a critical factor. It's not that he remains open towards truth, towards what can I do in this predicament. And that's when he gets help in the form of Krishna is there, and then is giving him these insights by which his apparent disappointment is used as a tool for self-inquiry. So in that sense, everything can be turned into a yoga, which is one of the reasons why suffering in a yogic context is viewed upon as helpful if we are only able to use it as such. Of course, you could say, well, when suffering becomes very grave and it becomes untold, then that is, of course, difficult to apply in those moments. But I don't know about you, but I'm always very deeply touched when there are examples of people who undergo suffering and at that point in time are able to use it as that as a tool for deeper inquiry into truth and the nature of reality, and that you see, my God, it has such a powerful transformative quality to it, that if used correctly, you can go much deeper than a life of relative peace and comfort, so to speak, where you are easily, can be, the comfort zone of everything is taken care of. There's always, food to eat, and
there's no reason to ask any questions.
Yeah, exactly. So within the yoga tradition, there is also an element connected to a yoga lifestyle. One is called tapas. Tapas means a bit like austerity or discomfort. So often when discomforts are invited, they can be very helpful as a tool for inner inquiry and inner progress, because it's the nature of the body mind to become easily a little bit comfortable with an external environment that is about to change anyways. It's like the next really big discomfort is not too far away. Eventually, the demise of our own body, which usually is accompanied by sickness, etc. So inviting and looking a little bit for discomfort, and within that, doing a practice can be very helpful, actually. So, and that is what Arjuna is experiencing in chapter 1, and I always find it very beautiful that wow, it's a situation. In any situation we are finding ourselves, we can take up the journey of self-inquiry. Of course, if the suffering is too large, then first some other needs are needing to be met. But in my own experience, in my own life, I just noticed, I know because I used to live also quite a few years in India. And I noticed that India is not really, it's a bit uncomfortable, the country. The climate is, it's either too cold or too hot. There's always something which is like pushing the buttons of comfort. But in a strange way, it's really helping in then diving deeper into, something which is more and deeper essence. So I think maybe it has helped, or it's one of the reasons why India seems to have created such a deep wisdom tradition, which is still alive today more than any other country that I know of. But yeah, that as a side note. And at this moment, again, any feedback or addition or reply towards this this aspect?
Or any example that you think like, oh yeah, this difficult period, it brought me to some deeper understanding somehow?
Yeah, maybe it's a good question to ask if this resonates, that discomfort or suffering can be actually quite helpful in embarking upon a path which is leading towards more connection in essence.
Well, the elephant in the room, obviously, is the pandemic.
Yeah.
And maybe it's too early to tell what benefit might come out of it, but I can already tell some things that are coming out of it.
Yeah.
It's, like for me, it's observing nature. So, I go running or play tennis, but rarely do I go walk in a park and look at trees or birds or the grass or the flowers. So I can say maybe a greater appreciation of nature,
Yeah.
Good one. Good example.
Good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say also when you look at, looking at how Kali is described, right? When we sing and chant, and Kali's always been the one that destructs, almost violently, I guess. In some ways, it's been described, things that do not serve us any longer in our lives. Those things are highly impactful, and they can be distressing, and they can be all these things. But most of the time, I think most of us can say that's exactly what needed to be done. That was exactly the need we had to get to a better place or a better realization. And I think for me, that's what I think of when you say that is those things that sort of self-destruct, that just aren't skillful within our lives, and how traumatic that can be, but how useful they could be at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, also true.
Yeah, so it's maybe it's good to ponder a little bit on that, like which aspects within our own lives seem to be a cause of disturbance and suffering, but how we can use them in a positive way on a path to deeper connection and deeper inquiry. I think that's also the idea. If you view it from within a framework of addiction, for example, which I think Russell Brandy is like this English comedian and author, which he wrote a book about that, which he is doing that quite beautifully, connected to because eventually it can be led back to patterns of behavior that we have accumulated that are in and of themselves leading to disconnection or to destruction. And the strange thing is that we've become habituated to them, even though we know that the outcome doesn't serve us well. And then to identify them and see how they can actually be used as well for the opposite, to come into deeper connection. And in that sense, they may serve us better than, maybe the comforts we would have otherwise had in our lives, by which we would think, well, it's nothing the matter. I'm living quite a comfortable life, and so I guess that's not for me. But I think the Gita is trying to point towards some urgency as well, that this sooner or later we are all going to be confronted with this extremely unpleasant experience and deep choices that need to be made in those type of circumstances. So that I think it's, in that sense, it's extremely relevant, and also what's happening now around us with calamity that of course can impact on an economical perspective the lives of many people, maybe even also ourselves. And then the idea is, okay, how can we use this to make an inner transformation? So in that sense, if you want to frame it into a context of a war or a battle, then there are so many battles that we need to fight that are presenting us daily to ourselves. And if we are able to frame it not into there's an external enemy that we need to kill, but more like behavior patterns that we have accumulated that are simply not serving us, then it's very useful. Yeah, Joe?
Very quick question. I'm sorry I'm asking so quickly. It's very interesting though. But would you see this as Arjun and Krishna as sort of an individual battle, be it ego, be it whatever, or in the sense of the pandemic, could you look at it as a collective battle, meaning all the global society and people, etc.?
Yes. Now, I personally think there's always an interplay between the individual and the collective, right? So none of us are existing as islands unto ourselves. So we all gather together in communities, and we live in communities, and connection, if anything, is a connection between something and something else. So it's always like this interplay. And then it touches a bit on what the Bhagavad Gita is expounding to be the best yoga. And that is not necessarily the yoga of, okay, I am leaving everything behind, I am detaching from the world, and I will go into a cave in the Himalayas and meditate on world peace, right? Mm-hmm. That's also, you can do that. And that's maybe the image that some people may have of the quintessential yogi, that he is detached from the world and just living his life in isolation. But the Bhagavad Gita is expounding a yoga which is all about interconnectivity. So how can we, as a collective, make this journey together towards a world of more harmony? And within that collective, there is then still your individual journey as well. And then this one important aspect from the Gita comes up again and again, that within our attempts, the Gita always advises to be equipoised or non-attached towards the outcome. So if we are trying within our community to move towards the right direction, and somehow or other it's not playing out the way we would like it to be or that we envision it to be, if that is then affecting our own path, our internal path towards more connection, then it also does not function. So there's this interplay between I need to take care and responsibility of what I can do in my own individual life, and we are trying to do that within the support group of the collective that we find ourselves in. And then usually it starts with finding at least a group of people who have the same, moral understanding and framework and vibe in order to move towards that direction, and create a sangha like that. And then if things play out well, it can move beautiful in harmony. But if not, then Gita is strongly advising, and that it's such a deep and but in my experience a very true thing. If you are able to remain still detached from that, with the vision that but even. And then I come back to your point, Annika, with the dualities between the good and the evil. Even if everything is collapsing around us, if you're still able to remain the vision that somehow or other, although I don't have the grand vision, but things are carried and supported and everything is all right on a deeper internal soul level. That is then important to remain that connection, and not if we see that according to our vision, if things fail, then now it's time to be greatly disappointed. So to keep that balance between the collective and the individual, but remaining always equipoised. It's called gelijkmoedig, is het Nederlandse woord. It's a Dutch word, is gelijkmoedig, and it's different from onverschillig. So the English word would be equipoised, but it's not the same as indifferent. So you care to the utmost, right? And you do everything to support connection. But if it turns out to be other than the way that your intention is, you don't become disappointed, but you remain equipoised. And that's such an extremely deep teaching from the Bhagavad Gita that is not easy to realize and to practice. But in my experience, the moment we are, able to apply it a little bit, there's always immediately big freedom and relief is coming along with that. So, yeah. So, like I said, chapter 1 is starting with the yoga of disappointment. And there are a few very important aspects that are then happening in chapter 2. And chapter 2 is about that Krishna is taking things immediately to a soul level. Because in the end, Arjuna his concerns are mostly related to relatives, but it's relative, meaning to say he's concerned about family members dying, about people getting hurt. And then Krishna starts chapter 2. Like chapter 1 is a chapter with a lot of names and descriptions of who are all assembled for the fight. And many people who start with the Bhagavad Gita, they give up after halfway of chapter 1. Because they think, oh my gosh, there's so many different names, it's extremely confusing. But it's better to skip chapter 1 because, the teachings start really in chapter 2. And from chapter 2 onwards, it's mainly the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. So, and then Krishna immediately takes it onto, he completely changes the perspective from something which is relative to the absolute perspective. And that is the perspective, he takes it to a soul level. So he says to Arjuna that I understand that you are concerned and that you are already mourning for what is about to come. But he says you are lamenting about something which you should not lament over, because he says the wise, they lament neither for the living, not for the dead. And why? And he says, Krishna says, because the soul, that which you are truly are in essence, and you are not your body and you are not your mind, but the soul is eternal. The soul cannot be killed by any means. It cannot be burned. It cannot be slain. It cannot be dried. It cannot be wet. The soul is eternal. So who is there to kill? And who is going to be killed? So he makes a clear distinction between the body, which is material and it's changing all the time, between the mind, and this is an important aspect in the yoga tradition. The mind is also considered to be material. It's not alive. It is an interface. And then eventually says, but what is the only true living thing is the Atma, the soul or the consciousness. And it is the consciousness that is animating and giving life to the body and the mind. But the soul in and of itself is eternal. Krishna says it has always been there. I have always been there. You have always been there. So what are you actually lamenting about? You are not, eventually you're not able to kill anything because everything is eternal. So he completely takes it to the perspective of eternity. And Krishna takes it out of the linear time frame reference that we are always having, that things have a beginning and an end in time. Something is beginning and then it has an end in time. And then you're not seeing the entire context. So if you place things in the context of eternity, then the picture completely changes, because what is then of ultimate concern? The body will die, and then Krishna says it will take on a new birth. He says, like the soul is moving in this body, the body is moving from young age to middle age to old age to death. And there's a change going on all the time. But the consciousness, it's staying the same all the time. And then at the moment of death, it is being described as the body has become like an old garment that has been worn out, and you have to change it, and you're putting on a new garment. According to the karma one has inquired by the way one has lived one's life. So in that sense, things are being put into a context of universal justice in that sense. Taking the perspective that in the last analysis, no one ever gets away with anything. Every little thing, everything is being recorded, not by some type of big brother is watching you, but by the universal consciousness of the universe. It's registering everything, and not in a judging way. So in a later chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that in the form of Paramatma, to the universal soul, he is present as the divine witness inside the heart of every living entity, just silently watching and observing of all that is taking place. And I've always found that to be a beautiful description, which also it resonates with me as that there's always a divine witness which is accompanying you and watching everything, and which you can turn to whenever you want for help and for instruction. But if not, it's not judgmental. It is part of the divine, which is just overseeing the journey of each and every soul in time and space as they move according to their desires. So that is an aspect of the Gita which really resonates with me. That the universal consciousness is there, and our individual consciousness, it's eternal, and it can never be killed, it can never be tainted, it can never be slain. So that is where the Bhagavad Gita is starting, with that understanding, separating what is relative and temporary from what is eventually eternal. And then a fascinating journey starts through the rest of the chapters, in which Krishna is describing many different aspects of yoga philosophy and how forces in the material nature work, so that we can navigate on the path to truth. So that is in short. Yeah. So that is in short how I would like to end this first session of the Gita, and maybe we can now quickly have a little bit of feedback of how we would like to continue with the study of the Gita, because like I said before, how we did it previously is that we started at the beginning, and then we were going through the Gita rather thematically. Everyone had the same copy. But I don't know what would be the best way to follow is. What we could also do is that a couple of days or a week before we have the next session, we could give a particular theme that we are discussing, connected to a particular chapter maybe, so people can read into it a little bit, and we can have more of exchange about it. I think it functions quite well with Zoom, and that when people want to add something, they unmute and they add. To me, it functions quite okay.
Shall we just do it one by one? Maybe just ask Eric and then...
Yeah, so Eric, what is your feeling?
So technically the setup of Zoom is good, I think. And then you want to do it bi-weekly or?
Yeah, bi-weekly.
Right. Yeah, I guess going step by step through the Bhagavad Gita, maybe introduce a theme a week prior. I wouldn't know. I'm open-minded, you know.
Laura?
Actually.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, I'm just grateful that you're doing this, and thank you for your time and for imparting your knowledge and wisdom. It's super helpful and super insightful. I do like the idea of a theme of sorts that would be applicable to daily life. You know, those takeaways I think are the most helpful for me as I contemplate the teachings and the ideas of applying this to maybe our more modern interconnected world, when we're trying to stay connected to our core and connect to others, and really live through that consciousness and the mindfulness of how we can inspire others through our own journey. And so I just would love anything that helps to address those challenges every day that we have, and how we can use these learnings.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sis?
I just typed the message as well. I like it this way. You hear me now?
Yeah.
It would be great in case you recorded that it would be possible to listen to it afterwards, in case I cannot join, but also to re-listen to some parts. I mean, I made some notes, but some parts were more interesting. Some parts I just didn't get fully. So could be nice to be able to listen to it again. And I don't know what you did exactly today, but in case you do refer to some specific verses, then it would be nice to put it in the group chat, so that at the same time I can look it up or remember which part you were talking about.
Yeah.
And for the rest, excellent. Really nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Annika?
Yeah, I really love it, and I love your proposal. I think it's a really nice one to work with a team, and that you give like a little bit assignment of which one we can read, and then we can discuss it, and then we can also prepare maybe questions and keep in mind how to make it daily in practice.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Anna?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed today's setting. And yeah, I do feel some kind of resistance to having homework. Yeah, so basically I really enjoyed how it went today. And yeah, I'll probably come unprepared next time if there is some material to read. So.
Yeah. There's no homework necessity at all in this. What I think, like listening to you, what I think might be a good idea is that I pick a theme from a particular area of the Bhagavad Gita and maybe give a reference in a document already to a few verses that then on the day itself we can put in the description, and then really play with it a little bit. What is the application of this wisdom teaching in our daily lives? I think that would be the most helpful in getting everything together, in getting a deeper understanding of the Gita, and then also see how these wisdom teachings can be of real, hopefully transformational use in our lives. And then such a way it can also still be accessible for people who are not able to join every time, because that was a little bit the problem now with how we did it before. We had a small group, and if you're going verse by verse, then it becomes a little bit more difficult if you don't know the previous history of all what has come before. So I would want to circle around this a little bit with this approach. I think that would work better in such a way. So.
And for each case to describe each kind of yoga, because every chapter has a certain kind of yoga.
Yeah.
So we kind of have an understanding of what kind of yogas there are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, great.
Right. Wow.
Great. Yeah, it's wonderful to see a few of you out in the nature.
Yeah.
It's really, really nice.
Blue skies.
Yeah. So.
Super. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. And hopefully sometime soon again live as well. But we are thinking, Noelle and I, that even if we do